Bonjour mes amis and welcome to the inaugural lesson in the French language series with me Mohit. Now today we discuss the absolute fundamentals, that is articles, how to express a and the, some and any in the French language. Now in French things tend to get a tad trickier as compared to English, because in English you have universally designated articles for both the genders. You've got the man, the woman, the boy, the girl, and so on. However, in French we have separately designated articles for both the genders. That is, the articles for the masculine are quite distinct from those designated for the feminine, and vice versa. Nonetheless, we're going to have a lot of fun because this is the day that you start your French language journey with Linguistica 7. Let's begin. Alright, so we begin with the first article, which is the. Now over here you may not be very thrilled to learn, but in the French language the article the takes 4 separate forms depending upon the gender and the number of the word or the noun that follows the article immediately. So the first form of the article the in French is le, which is to be pronounced as le. Le. Now how do you pronounce that? What's happening inside my mouth is that the tip of my tongue is touching the roof of my mouth and then I just let it drop. What do I get? I get le. When do you use le as the in French? You use it whenever the word following it is masculine in gender and singular in number. Now over here I'd like to point out that you needn't worry at all about the genders of the words in the French language, because that's the topic we're going to take up immediately in the very next video after this one. So for now all you need to know is that if you got a masculine noun in a sentence, the article that you're going to use will be le. Let's take an example. You've got le passeport. Le passeport, which in English would translate to the passport. Now over here, passeport in French is masculine in gender, and you've got one passport over here, hence it is singular as well, which is why we use le as the article fitting with passeport. You've got le passeport. Over here, a pronunciation note. I'm sure you must have noticed that I am deliberately omitting the pronunciation of the final T over here. Now, T is a consonant, and in French, we have a usage rule that whenever you've got a consonant towards the end of the word, we tend to omit its sound and we replace its sound with the sound of the letter preceding the consonant immediately, which in this case is an R, and the sound of an R in French is a harsh k sound. K, which comes from the back of the throat, something that you would produce the sound when you're gargling. So you've got that k, which is exactly the sound that I'm using, however, on a very subtle level in the word passeport. I'm using R as the final sound, so you've got le passeport as the passport in French, le being used over here because of the virtue of passport being a masculine. That's the first form. We come down to the second form of the, which is la, and luckily we pronounce it just the way we write it, so this is la. La. You use la as an article in French whenever you've got the noun as a feminine and you've got it in singular numbers as well. So let's take an example. You've got la leçon. Once again, that is la leçon. Now, la leçon in English translates to the lesson. Leçon in French is a feminine, and since we're talking about one lesson over here, it's singular as well, which is why we use la as the article over here. You got la leçon. Pronunciation notes once again. If you're wondering what this little symbol is all about, this little symbol is known as the cedilla. Now what a cedilla does is it preserves the soft note of C and doesn't let it transform into the harsh note k, which often happens in English, such as in the word school. The C turns into the k sound, but not over here. Because of the presence of the cedilla, leçon remains leçon and does not turn into lecon. So you've got la being used for feminine singular words such as leçon over here. So that's 2 out of the 4. We come to the third form, which is L apostrophe. Now L apostrophe works both for feminine as well as the masculine. When do we use it? We use it whenever the word following L apostrophe immediately starts with a vowel or with an H. Let's take an example over here one more time. You've got L apostrophe hotel. Now technically hotel is a masculine in French, which is why it would require the use of le as an article. However, so just for explanatory reasons, I'm going to put that e over here. So now this would come out as le hôtel. Le hôtel. Nonetheless, in French we have a usage rule once again that whenever 2 vowels occur back to back, like e or a vowel occurs back to back with an H, we tend to omit that vowel over there, like I just removed it over here, and we replace that with an apostrophe. And what happens because of this is that the sound of that L fuses with the sound of the very first letter of the word following it. What do you get over here? You get l'hôtel. You do not get le hôtel, instead you get l'hôtel, which in English translates to the hotel. Now this technique that just took place here is known as liaisoning in language. Liaisoning is a technique which is responsible for maintaining the flow and fluency of a language. Imagine if we weren't to use this technique over here, we would have le hôtel. You would feel that unnatural pause in your throat, which is not there anymore, and you've got l'hôtel. So that's L apostrophe being used for all the words which begin with a vowel or with an H. We come to the last one, which is les. However, it's pronounced as lay most of the times. It is les as lays as well. We'll come to that very shortly. It is pronounced as lay. When do we use it? We use it universally with both the genders, be it masculine or feminine, but we use it only when the nouns are plural in number. So you've got lay. Examples over here, you've got les passeports. Now over here, le passeport has transformed into les passeports because this would mean the passport, as we've already discussed. However, over here we have the passports, and you've also got les enfants, which means children. Once again, the pronunciations are, you've got les passeports and les enfants. Another pronunciation note over here which I find very critical, which is, in case you've noticed, I am pronouncing the S whenever I use it with enfant, but I am omitting the sound of S whenever I use it in case of passeport. We've got le passeport and you've got les enfants. The reason for that again lies within the technique of liaisoning, which is that again in the French language, whenever two consonants occur back to back, as in this case you've got S and P, which are both consonants, we tend to omit the sound of the first consonant, making it le passeport. Although it will be very much present in the writing, although it goes away from the pronunciation, you've got les passeports. On the other hand, if a consonant and a vowel occur back to back, we will very much merge or fuse the sounds of the vowel, the vowel as well as the consonant, resulting in les enfants instead of les enfants. So one more time, that's le passeport, which means passports, and you've got les enfants, which means children. And that's all the four versions of the article de in the French language. We move on to the next article over here, which is a. All right, we begin with the next article, which is a. Now, some relief for you over here that as opposed to the previous article, the, a only takes two separate forms, one for the masculine nouns and other for the feminine genders. We begin right away with the masculine form, which is un, not to be pronounced as un, but as The n needn't be enunciated here, rather it's to be kept very nasal, resulting in the pronunciation of this as I'm going to take an example here for this. Let's take un chéquier. Now, un chéquier in English would translate to a checkbook. So, since checkbook in French is masculine, and since we're talking about one checkbook in singular, hence we use the article un in conjunction with chéquier. Some pronunciation notes for this word chéquier over here. Let's begin. So you've got un, which we've already discussed, is nasal, hence un is the article there. Ch, whenever ch occurs at the beginning of a French word, it gets the sh sound, hence sh. Then, if you're wondering what this symbol is all about, this symbol is known as accent aigu, A-I-G-U, which is pronounced as aigu. What an aigu does is it transforms the sound of E into AY, making it A instead of E, which is why overall you get the word as un chéquier. So that's the first article for the masculine, which is un. We come to the female counterpart for that, which is un. Again, once again, the feminine version is pronounced just the way it's written. You've got un over there, working for all the nouns which are feminine and singular in number. Let's take an example for that as well. You've got une lettre. Once again, une lettre. Now, this in English translates to a letter. Letter in French being a feminine noun, and it's one letter over here, hence it's singular as well. Une lettre, nothing much in the name of pronunciation notes over here. We've already discussed that the R gets a harsh throaty sound of kh, hence I'm using that sound over here, and we end up with une lettre. And that is the article as un for all the feminine nouns in French. We finally move on to the articles some and any. Let's go. Alright, so we finally arrive at the articles some and any. Now, as you know, some and any are used in two scenarios. A, when you have uncountable quantities, and B, when you have unknown quantities of countable nouns. So let's just get into it right away. We have the first French version of the article some, which is du. Now notice the pronunciation over here as opposed to the harsh D in English, wherein your tongue hits the floor of your mouth quite hard. In this case, we will introduce a reasonable degree of delicacy. What I'm going to do in my mouth is I'm going to stick my tongue between the upper and the lower teeth, and then I'm going to follow it by the rounding of my lips, resulting in a gentle du. So you've got du working as the masculine some in French. Let's take an example over here. You've got du vin. Now, du vin in English translates into some wine. Wine, as you know, is a liquid, hence an uncountable quantity. So you use du in conjunction with vin. Now, pronunciation aid over here. Now, if you're wondering why this is not win, in case of French, whenever you've got an IN ending a word, the IN takes the shape of an AAN, with the N being very nasal. Hence, the outcome remains at du vin, which once again in English translates to some wine. So that's some in French for you. In the masculine form, you've got du. Coming to the feminine counterpart over here, we've got de la. Now, it's pronounced just the way it's written. You've got de la working as the feminine singular in French for some. An example coming up, de la bière. Once again, that's de la bière, which in English would translate to some beer. Now, pronunciation aids again. Now, de la bière. Now, over here, you've got this symbol. Now, what this symbol is known as the grave accent or the accent grave in French. What is the use of it? The use of it is that it transforms the sound of E into a downward sloping E. Now let's compare it with the accent aigu, which we've already covered. When you apply the accent aigu with an E, the E turns into A. On the other hand, accent grave turns the E into E. And it is because of that accent grave, we've got de la bière and not de la bière, which would be the case with accent aigu. However, over here, you've got de la bière. So that's de la as the French some in case of feminine nouns. We come to an offshoot of the same. We've got de l apostrophe. As you've already done the technique of liaisoning with me, that's exactly what's happening here. So if you've got a word following up de la, which begins with a vowel or an H, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to replace, we're going to truncate rather, or entirely omit that vowel, which would otherwise fall over here, and put an apostrophe in its place, merging the two sounds. So the English alcohol turns over here into de l'alcool. De l'alcool translating into English as some alcohol. So that's liaisoning for you once again. And we finally arrive at the final version of some or any, which is for the plurals, which is des and pronounced as they. Now, when do we use it? As I've already mentioned, it works for both the masculine as well as the feminine, the only condition being that the nouns need be in the plural form. Examples coming up quickly. You've got des leçons, which translates into English as some lessons, as opposed to la leçon, which we've already covered, which was the lesson. Over here, you've got some lessons, des leçons, and you've got that cedilla over here, which we've already discussed. And the final example being des filles. Des filles, which translates into some girls. You've got the double L working as whenever you have a double L in between French words, the L does not take the characteristic L sound as it would in English. On the contrary, the double L takes a sound in French of somewhat an E, the E feeling, which is why this is not des filles. On the contrary, what you have over here is des filles. So that's they working as some for all the plurals, masculine and feminine in French. And folks, with that, we come to the end of the chapter on articles in French. Hopefully the introductory lesson was encouraging enough for you. If it has been, stay put, stay tuned for the next lesson in French, which will be the gender of French nouns. Till then, thank you so much for watching. We'll be back soon. Cheers.